Yankov Kamenetsky once said with his great pikchas that don't think that the American Rabbanim are any less than the European Rabbanim. It's just that they have more difficult Shailos. And this is expressed primarily when you talk about technology in the 21st century, the challenging, unprecedented, unparalleled struggles that we have to deal with to try to apply the Torah of yesterday to the Metzias of today is daunting, to put it mildly. But specifically, what I wanted to talk about today is the subject of spending Shabbos in a hotel, the various questions that a person is confronted with when he spends Shabbos in a hotel. And although many people are still believe in Ashrei Yosher Eisech, they perhaps don't go away to hotels, but the sugyas, the yisaidis are really relevant for each and every one of us, and it's not limited at all to specifically to a situation of a hotel. And we're going to touch upon the major yisaidis of Hilchos Shabbos, Amir La'akum, about a yid getting involved in doing malacha, and as we'll see, it's yisaidis even if you're not from those travelers that spend Shabbos in a hotel. Basically, what we have to know is that Amir La'akum is a very important point to be aware of. And I'll give you a brief introduction, something that happened here, Taka, in this era, Torah or Shraga. We have a very big island, a few hundred b'nei Torah, and the water supply was on Shabbos, when the urn was depleted. There was not enough hot water. What happened was the guy, on his own, no one asked him, the guy filled up the water, and then the question was asked, can we have hana from the water? Now, this is a very important question, because this is basically the halacha in Reish Ayin Vav Sif Aleph. As you know, the halacha is that a guy that does malacha. I'm
sure the Rav Smith, that noise is on your side?
Yes, there's a fire alarm has just been put out, so we apologize.
Okay.
We're back to normal. So basically, a malacha that a guy does, Shulchan Aruch says, even if you didn't ask him to do it, he did it on his own initiative. There was an issa of enjoying. I'm sorry, it's just ringing. I don't know what is happening, but okay. But basically, the guy that did it, you can't have enough from that malacha. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch in Shin Chafei adds, even on Matzai Shabbos, you can't have enough from the water or anything that the guy did until there's adequate time to have done that malacha. The point is, and again, we have to clarify this because we might be talking some hetkulas regarding Amir La'akum. Amir La'akum is no simple matter. The Tshuvas Min HaShemayim is one of the Rishonim, one of the Balei HaTosos, in fact. And he says the following. They asked the question, and evidently he asked questions Min HaShemayim. Now, I don't know how he received his response, in what letterhead and what type of connection, but he asked about a guy being enlisted to move a candle, which a guy is doing in Issa D'Rabbanan. And the response was emphatic, Leisige bayod, kisakel yisakel, kol anegeya b'divrayim, k'negeya b'bavas einai. Amazing lashon. Uvakama mekaymas asu chachamim chizuk divrayim, yaisim mishal Torah. In other words, Amir La'akim is no simple matter and certainly not a pushover. To quote one Rav that told me a bit disappointed, some people think that Amir La'akim is not just a heta, it's a way of life. Well, we know Amir La'akim is not a heta, and it certainly should never be a way of life. So now that we have somewhat of a introduction to Amir La'akim, we have to proceed. But let's say the guy does it on his own, says the Mishnah and Sifkat and Yud Aleph, Tzarech limchais biyad, you have to protest. And if need be, if he doesn't listen, says the Mishnah, you have to ask him to leave. Because Chazal understood if a guy will be allowed to do malacha for us, there's no end. And then it will indeed turn into a way of life. But, and this is important for the rest of the sugya, we have to know there's one very fundamental concept that has to be applied. I had the Shailos once in the yeshiva where I give a shir. It was an off Shabbos. So I walked by the yeshiva Friday night, understandably the lights were off because there was no yeshiva that Shabbos. Shabbos afternoon, I was thinking of learning a Beis Medrash. It's a quiet Beis Medrash, no one's there. And the lights were on. I walk in, what happened? Apparently the guy decided to clean up the Beis Medrash Shabbos afternoon. He does it whenever he wants, but his decision was to make it Shabbos afternoon. So I realized this is heaven sent for me, because I wanted to learn in the Beis Medrash. I was willing to learn in the dark Beis Medrash, but now the lights are on. Can I use the lights that he put on in the Beis Medrash on Shabbos? The answer is yes. We just learned you can't have Hana from Meleches Akum, but this is the well-known Yesod of Adaita Denafshe. If the sins in this context, the guy put on the light for himself because he wanted to clean the Beis Medrash, the choice of doing it Shabbos was his own choice. He was not instructed. That's not part of his contract. On off Shabbos, he could do it Friday or Sunday or Matzoi Shabbos. So basically, he put on the light for himself. Once it was done, beheta, the Yid could have Hana. In fact, the Shmir Shabbos points out that you could even tell him, you know what, when you finish cleaning, don't close the light. Keep it on. I want to stay here. Because initially it was done for himself, and Amir La'akum, when it's Adaite Denafshe, when it's done for himself, is mutter. Now, contrast that to the question that I had in camp, where the guy filled up the water, even though he did it on his own initiative, but he did it for us. That's the crucial difference. The guy put on the light in Beis Medrash to sweep for himself, for his own benefit. Then I could have Hana. If the guy did it on his own for us, that's Amir La'akum. And that's why it's unfortunate that some shuls, some mekaymas, they have the guy in work and they put on the lights, put off the lights. They're doing it for the Yid, not for themselves. It's only in a rare case that I mentioned that there would be this heta of Amir La'akum Adaita Denafshe. Now, people always ask, I heard if you ask the guy to do something and then you give him a little token of appreciation, for example, you tell him to put on the oven and you give him a piece of kugel or some cholent, then it's okay. Now, that's a misconception. They're putting it mildly. It's wrong. They're putting it bluntly. There's no heta to have enlist a guy to do malacha for you, even though you reward him. What people are confusing with is a important Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan says the basic yesod is Amir La'akum is asa, even if you don't tell him. Again, Amir La'akum is even if you don't tell him. The deciding fact is he did malacha for you. But when something is adaita denafshe, it's mutter. So the Aruch HaShulchan has a important einfal where he says perhaps we could create an adaita denafshe. You call into the guy to your house and you say, would you like something to eat? He goes, sure. But it's dark. I can't find the food. He said, oh, no problem. I could put on the light. I'm not Jewish. And he puts on the light or lights a candle. So in that case, he did it for himself. His objective is to get that piece of kugel. So the Aruch HaShulchan says what was done in the olden days before they had lights, they had to rely on candles that sometimes and often malfunctioned. They needed a guy to light a candle. So you called him into your dark house and you showed him the dark kitchen. You said, I would like to give you something to eat. He goes, yeah, but I can't find it. Okay, I'll put on the light. Obviously, in those days, light meant a candle. So that would be a situation that you engineered a adaita denafshe situation. The guy put on the candle, lit the candle, and then he got his food. Of course, you have to give him. Now, but that doesn't mean that if you give the guy a reward after he does malach, it's mutter. That's absolutely not true. Now, I should mention today, when a person does have a het amir la'akum, which is a different share, but let's say the Rav said you could have a guy do something for you, there really is no chiyuv to give him some kugel or cholent. I mean, it's a nice gesture, and you should be makir toiv, and it's a kiddush Hashem. But the original concept was that the guy was given food, he was unable to find it. The only way to do it was to light the candle for himself, and that would be a legitimate adaita denafshi. Remember when I first started giving shir many years ago, I had a feisty yid. He came from Munkach. So he told me a story. They once in Europe, I think he remembers it. Their house was dark, so they called in a guy and they said, "Would you like some schnapps?" He goes, "Yeah," because well, if you find it, it's yours. And of course, the guy lit the candle, drank the schnapps, and blew out the candle. So they said, would you like some more schnapps? He goes, sure. He lit the candle, took schnapps, blew out the candle again. Finally, someone says, just light the candle and leave. So someone asked him, I'll do that. Amir la'akim is asa. He goes, Amir la'akim is usa. Amir la'bahaim is mitta. Assuming that the person doesn't realize that we need the candle. The truth is, the joke is a good joke, but Amir la'bahaim is taka asa. I saw the HaRav and Kufay and Dalit has a tshuva about a disabled soldier, and they gave him a dog that's able to do certain malachas. And he said, that's based on the pasuk behemtecha. So really, Amir la'akim is asa and Amir la'bahem is asa. So let's not misunderstand this heta. The heta is only when the guy does malacha for himself. What they should have done in that case of those frustrated people in Munkach, what they should have done is, after the guy lit the candle to get the schnapps, they should have said, don't put out the candle. That's mutter. Once he put it on for himself, the not extinguishing it, that's not a hana, and that would be okay. So basically, we have the following. You say this, Amir la'akim is asa, bahana, in fact. Amira is lav dafka. It's even without Amira. It's basically a guy doing something for the Yid, even if it's his own decision. But the fundamental heta is adaita de nafshe, which means the guy is doing the malacha for his own convenience, for his own benefit, for his own purpose. Now let's apply to the specifics of spending Shabbos in a hotel. We'll try to cover as much time allows us, but we'll start with the question that people have in hotels, nursing homes, hospitals as well. And that is, today in heightened security world that we live in, it's not easy to come into any building any longer. Today you have to be buzzed in. The security, there's a guard sitting in his seat, and he has to buzz you in if you're not suspicious. The question is, you want to enter a hotel, a hospital, a nursing home. What you're doing is basically you are more than just alluding, you're implying that the guy should buzz you in. The guy is doing a malacha of buzzing you in. So typically, if he could get off his, quote, kisi hakavod, off his comfortable chair and open the door for you manually, then that buzzing in, that activating electricity is a daita de nafshe, because his objective is to get you in and make sure you're safe. He could get off his chair and open the door for you. The fact that he chose for his own convenience not to get off his seat, but to buzz you in, that would be a legitimate adaita de nafshe, because you have to just be allowed entry, and that he could do manually without a malach. The same thing would basically apply, and this is important to mention. People, let's say, go to a convention, go to a Shabbos simcha in a hotel, and they want to visit a friend, and they go to the front desk and they ask the clerk, which room is so and so? So what you're doing in our times is you're almost asking the guy to get onto the computer and find out which room the person that you're looking to visit. So that's an issue. You go to a hospital, I'd like to visit so-and-so. Okay, they get on the computer and they know which room he is. So basically, it's getting more than just implying, almost requesting that they should do malach on your behalf. Now, if they have lists, written lists, handwritten lists, which is almost unthinkable in our times, maybe by a Jewish convention, a simcha, where Bali Simcha or the organizers like to have their own lists, so they could access the information without getting onto a computer, then you could say they chose to go on computer. That's their convenience. That's a daita de nafshi. But the question is, typically a hospital and today many hotels work, it's all with technology. It's no longer lists. Is there a heta to request this information? So we come to an important yesod in Shulchan Aruch, it's in Siman Shin Zayin Sif Hey, where the Mechaber makes an important exception to the Issa Mir La'akum. And that is the well-known heta of Shvus D'Shvus B'Makam Mitzvah, which means if it's a double derabanan and the purpose is B'Makam Mitzvah, that Chazal waived the Issa Mir La'akum in order to facilitate the performance of a mitzvah. Davar she'ein a malacha, it's not a malacha, and it's only a shvus. For example, we'll soon see getting on a computer typically is the Rabbanan, and the whole Amir La'akum is a Rabbanan. So there is a certain leniency, but mixas chayli, sarach hadav tzarich haba, ibet neha mitzvah. Now, typically, this is a share for itself, applying this yesod. But let's say a person going to the hospital, he has to know which room the patient is in. That's certainly a bona fide makom mitzvah, and he could request the information, although it's really requesting the guy to do a malach. Now, here I sort of assume something I want to explain. In the advent of electricity, there was much discussion. What is the status of the issa of using electricity? Going back from beginning of electricity, let's talk about an incandescent bulb, a light bulb, or today we're talking about the most modern technology. But basically, to put it simply, even though it's not at all simple, there's numerous possibilities of what the malach of electricity might entail. There's boina, there's makiva patish, mavir, there's bishul if there's if there's a filament of a light bulb, the metal wire gets hot. But to make a very long story very short, we treat electricity as if it is a suffix daraisa. But, and here's the big but, b'makom mitzvah, b'makom tzarich, and you're not doing it yourself, you're enlisting a guy to do malacha, the Paiskim would say that any type of appliance that does not employ any type of heating element, there's no aish. In other words, an oven, a crock pot has an aish component to it. But a computer, an alarm, a refrigerator, at least the old-fashioned refrigerators that don't have any type of heating element in it, is using electricity without a potential aish. We could rely on the opinions that electricity, absent a presence of aish or an aish substitute, so to speak, is an issa d'Rabbanan. Now, of course, us Yidden, we don't do isuri d'Rabbanan either. But to employ a non-Jew to do a malacha d'Rabbanan would qualify to be the heta of shvus d'shvus b'makom mitzvah. So again, if you go to a hospital or even by a convention or a Shabbos simcha, you want to visit your parents. You don't know which room they're in. You want to visit someone that needs a little chizik. In a hospital, is always a makom mitzvah. But if there's an agenda of makom mitzvah, you could even ask the guy which room is he in, even though implicit you're requested that he's going to go on the computer. But that would be a shvus to shvus. Again, Amir La'akum is only the Rabbanan. Using computers is the Rabbanan, and b'makom mitzvah, that would be mutter. There's all the oldest question by you go to a hotel, you want to order room delivery. I want Shabbos morning, I want this, Shabbos afternoon, I want that. So bringing the food is in itself not a malacha, but you know they're going to use the elevator. So here the crucial factor is with what floor are you on? If you're on the 25th floor, of course he could walk up the 25 floors, but with your big order, it's highly doubtful, or better yet, unreasonable to think he's going to walk up the 25 floors. The Mishtabur and Reish Mem Dalet, Sifka and Chav Dalet says the heta daita de nafshe is if it is reasonable that he'll do it without do malacha. But if you ask him for room service, and again you're on one of the highest stories, and it's unthinkable he will walk, then that is a problem of Mir La'akum, because implicit in your request is he's going to use the elevator, and unless it's makom mitzvah, you're back to a Mir La'akum le'sigeh bayod. Now, if you're on a lowest story, or the hotels that I've been recently, there are not too many floors in the first place. So since he could walk, that would be a reasonable case of Amir La'akum, which is a daita denafshi. He could walk the few stories. So even though he chooses to use the elevator, that's for his convenience, and that would be okay. One of the old Shailos is when they have a Goyish waiter walking around and he's taking people's orders. What would you like? You like beef? You like chicken? My experience in the convention that I've been recently, you usually get everything without ordering that. You get a plate full that has everything. But in those days, you ordered something, and the guy would walk around with a pen and paper and a pad, and he would record your order. So the truth is, one could argue that this adaita denafshe, he could keep a cheshbon in his mind, he'll use his fingers, he'll use his toes, He's very creative. He could do it without writing. So the writing is his convenience that it makes it easier for him to remember. But as Rav Zilberstein in Sefer Melachim Amnayach writes, it calls it Issa Gam of a Zilzal Noyer Barabim, a non-Jew walking around by a Jewish Shabbos, a Jewish convention, whatever it is, and he's writing orders with pen and paper. It's just very inappropriate. We can't say it's Asa Gomer. If it's shaykh to remember, then perhaps you have a head that the nafshe, but it's certainly very, very inappropriate for the Kedusha Shabbos. He calls it Issa Gomer V'Zilzal Noyer Barabim. A question that comes up is many hotels have room service. They clean the room Shabbos morning. And unless you indicate otherwise, they will come into your room and tidy up. So someone asked me, he went to a hotel, and if you put up a don't disturb sign, they won't come. If you don't do anything, they'll do the cleaning that's necessary. Am I mechuyev to put up a don't disturb sign because I don't want to do malacha for me? So you have to analyze this from a halachic perspective. When they do room service, it entails things that are generally not malachas per se, making the bed, changing the towels, and other things that are done are basically not malacha related. The problem is the vacuuming, which perhaps you could argue they could do it without the vacuuming, they could sweep it, but that's also unreasonable. And more so, the vacuum cleaner is an afshe milsa problem. It's disparaging to Kedusha Shabbos. So that's something that I think has been discontinued, at least in the Jewish hotels that are run al pi Torah, that the room service could be continued, but absent the vacuuming. But certainly it's not in Kedusha Shabbos to have vacuum cleaners make noise on Shabbos morning. When the guy comes in and puts on the light to clean and puts off the light when they leave, that's a daita denafshi. We had a question, which again, recently we've seen some improvement in this problem, but as Rabbi Gottesman just mentioned, the magnetic card, the magnetic key, that's a problem, because here, a yid, of course, when he uses his key, he's doing malacha. Whatever the malacha is, or but it's irrelevant. The problem is when a yid can't get into his room. So can you enlist the guy in using the card, using the key to open the door? So again, this is problematic because you have to realize that he's doing it just for you. Now, if you tell him once, I'd like to give you something, I'd like to give you a present, but I can't get my room now because I don't have a access because it's Shabbos, and he takes out his own key and he opens the door. So that would be a created daita denafshe, similar to the Aruch HaShulchan's hat that we mentioned earlier. But it's not practical, it's not legal probably, it's very suspicious. You don't want to give a great present. The whole thing just doesn't make sense. So basically that's why it has been advised that either they get to go to a hotel that doesn't have this problem, or minimally you'll keep all your valuables in a safe, and at night you can lock the door, and basically do not employ the guy in opening the door. But some people are uncomfortable leaving their doors locked. So basically it's a problem, because unless you consider this a makkah mitzvah, because you have to get into your room at night, you have to get out. Out's easier, but getting in is a problem. It's really going lechatchila to a place that you have to rely on Amir La'akum, which is problematic. Now, I once wondered if the hotel management has keys, literal keys, to each room. Maybe the fact that they choose to use the card is a daita denafshi, because they do have the access to the keys. But again, that's something that only the management has and the workers don't have. Baruch Hashem, in recent years, we've seen an achshadara in the hotels that are more Shabbos friendly. In fact, that was by the Midwest Aguda Convention, and they had a whole system how they bypassed the entrance that's generally done with a card, a computer card, and it was a Kiddush Hashem to see that things are being done right. So basically, when you could avoid this, avada, you should. If someone ends up, because of a situation, had to go to a hospital, he ended up in a hospital, and he had to go to a hotel Friday night to sleep, he had nobody else to sleep in, and he realized, oh, he can't get into the room, there's no access unless you use a card. So that, in that case, in extenuating circumstances, we can rely on a shvus to shvus, but makkah mitzvah, to ask a guy to open the door for you. But again, l'chatchila, to take hundreds of people to a place that they're using a card, knowing in advance that you're relying on the het amir la'akum, but makkah mitzvah, is definitely questionable. We had a question where someone went to a hotel and simply forgot to bring his alarm clock. And he asked me, could he order the wake-up service Friday afternoon? You go down to the desk and you say, I'd like to be awoken at 7 o'clock, whatever time he wants to wake up. Is that mutter? Because basically you are programming, so to speak, and a wake-up call on Shabbos. The wake-up call obviously is with a phone. So if it's fully automated, you just leave your order and they punch it into a computer and it calls, it's fully automated. So then there's no malacha by any person being done on Shabbos. It's like everything else. You're allowed to plug in your refrigerator Erev Shabbos. You're allowed to do malacha Erev Shabbos that takes place on Shabbos. If indeed it's done manually, there's a human being that calls you. So in a case like this, the person was afraid he'll miss davening, he'll miss Man Krishma. He's afraid he'll sleep through the davening, laning. So that's shvus b'makom mitzvah. You're requesting a guy to do malacha specifically for you. It is malacha, but it's a derabanan level malacha, but makom mitzvah would be permissible. I'll say, but isn't that af shemilsa? In my hotel room, Shabbos morning, the phone rings. The answer is no. Av shemilsa is when it's suspect that malacha was done. But wrong numbers happen all the time. People get phone calls on Shabbos from a random caller, a wrong number. So basically, there's no av shemilsa problem. The only point is, if it can be avoided, of course, you should avoid it. But if it's a question of missing davening, you could even order a guy to call on Shabbos. I would highly recommend that before Shabbos, move the phone away from your bed, because it could happen. A person wakes up, but she didn't have a good night's sleep, and the phone rings, and impulsively he picks up the phone. And the guy says, wake up, but you're not supposed to pick up the phone. It's Sabbath. So you got your mussar shmooze and you realize your mistake. So put the phone at a distance from your bed so you won't inadvertently pick up the phone. An interesting question that comes up in the hotels, which is one of the more major problems, is the hot water, the drinking hot water. Now you have to realize, when you have a big convention or a big simcha, a few hundred people, it's hard to have enough hot water in urns, no matter how many urns you invest in. But it just, the question is, how much hot water could you have that was boiled before Shabbos? I remember specifically, I overheard someone asking one of the non-Jewish workers, is there hot water? So he replied, this is Shabbos afternoon. It's not ready yet. Now, I found it very hard to melamed schus what that means. It's not yet ready. Do they have these very slow urns that need 18 hours to boil the water? Unfortunately, when water is needed and they run out of water, it's very tempting. Just fill up the urn, aydei akum, and plug it in, and a half hour later, you have hot water. But that's not only is that a violation, amir la'akum, but no yid is allowed to enjoy the water, because that is mamish the case we began with, where a guy boiled the water, albeit on his own, without being requested, but he's boiling the water for the yid's consumption. That's a classic amir la'akum. Even though you didn't ask him, but he's doing it specifically for you. And once, I should mention, Taka, it's a Kiddush Hashem, someone told me he worked for Aguda, and he installed in a hotel that Aguda used many years at the convention, a hot water tank that people typically have in their homes. It was 70, 80, up to 150 gallons. And that was the supply of water, drinking water. A lot of chachma went into that, but that would be something, of course, that's perfect. Heta, not a heta, it's done perfectly. It has enough volume of water to supply the great need. But if a person knows that water, again, I'm not talking about any specific hotel, I'm not familiar with the mitzias of many hotels, but I could say that we are brought the kashrus level up to the highest levels, Baruch Hashem, and we have to make sure that the Shabbos should also be glat kosher, glat shmir Shabbos, and water has to be boiled before Shabbos. There are kashrus organizations that are very makbid. They have tape put over the knobs, so it can't be tampered with. It can't be replaced, obviously. So that's something that you have to be, cognizant of, that sometimes the guy is tempted to fill up the water. Now, sometimes you could have a very big urn and they transfer it to smaller urns. That doesn't involve malacha per se. It's boiled water being taken from urn A to urn B. And it's also a daita denafshe. They don't want to have to bring cups of water to people, but that's less of an issue. But if a guy boils water on Shabbos, that's a violation of Reisha and Vav, and it's also to have hana on Shabbos and Matzoi Shabbos Chadesh Yas. Now, the conscience is always very illuminating. If a person happens to be in a non-Jewish hospital, non-Jewish building of any sort, and the Geisha worker filled up the hot water, and he knows there's no problem of kashrus, of course, so that'd probably be mutter, because the guy was unaware of the Yid's presence. The guy did it for the other non-Jewish people in the hospital or whatever the building is, so that's easier. But if you're talking about a Shabbos, a convention, a hotel, that it's all Yidden, and you have to be careful that the guy should never be boiling water on Shabbos, even if he's not told, even if it's his job, so to speak. It's his job to work for the Yid. That's not a daita denafshe. Daita denafshe would be, again, this is theoretical, of course, if the guy wants hot water and he boils up a cup of water, and then he says, I'm not going to take it, then you could take it. Okay, if you don't believe in my signal, you could steal the water. That's not a mir la'akum, at least as far as the water, because he made it for himself. But if the guy does it just for the Yid, that is a serious violation of a mir la'akum. Another question that's kedai to mention, even though that's a share for itself, fascinating sugya, the elevators, the use of elevators on Shabbos or Yom Tiv, which we can't even touch upon it because it's such a big sugya, but I think we all realize that elevators, like other things, have different level of kashrus. There are some elevators produced by companies in Eretz Yisrael that have less Shailos, some have more Shailos, some are better designed than others halachically. But I just want to make a point that an elevator research should be done before Shabbos to find out if there's a acceptable hechsher on the elevator. Escalators have the same problem and need the same attention, because escalators also work with the weight that it has to transport. So the almost identical problems of elevators apply to escalators. So those that are makbid not to use an elevator, an escalator would have the same concerns, even though it's more tempting and it doesn't seem as challenging as an elevator, but it's really the same mechanics. And a person that does want to use it should make sure that this is appropriate. Erev Chatzeris in a hotel, it happens, a person for the first time comes to a hotel and he says, by the way, they didn't make an Erev Chatzeris here, as if they discovered America. So that's obviously a share for itself, but the basic klal is, even though you could have a few hundred families, but if they're eating out of one kitchen, if they're basically a shaymech al shulchan echad, albeit a very big shulchan, but if they come from one kitchen, that does not require an Erev Chatzeris, because it's just like you have your guests, your family, extended family, strangers, it's all part of your household. You don't even need a Chatzeris. Rav Moshe in Archaim Chelik Vav, Siman Lamed Gimel, applies that to many families coming together. He doesn't spell out the word hotel, but that's probably what he's referring to. So an hotel, basically, if it's hundreds of guests, but are eating out of one kitchen, they're the guests of whoever's running the convention or the Baal Simcha, halacha, an Erev Chatzeris would not be required. I do know that typically they do make an Erev Chatzeris. Sometimes people bring their own food and other concerns. There might be managers that have their own kitchen. So there are certain side issues that are of concern. But basically, they do make an Erev Chatzeris, but if it was not done, there's what to be saimech on, that there's no need for an Erev Chatzeris. Where to light the Neirei Shabbos in a hotel is an interesting question. I want to mention it briefly. And basically, we paskin, you could have a few people lighting in one area, even though it's just a Tosefes R, but that's enough to make a bracha. But to stick it into a side room, all the people light in a side room and then lock the door, that's problematic, because no one's having enough from those neiros. Because after you light the neiros, they lock the door for safety reasons, which is a valid concern, but no one's having enough from the neiros. Now, in a rare situation that they allow the people to light in their hotel rooms, actually, then that would be a much better place to light, because that would give the necessary aura of Shabbos, the ambiance of Shabbos, to the hotel room. And it's also neiros that are being lit specifically for this family. But because of the of course, the obvious concern of safety. It's usually not allowed and it should not be done. I was once by a convention and someone lit a candle and the smoke alarm rang, and the law is once it rings, it's not allowed to be closed until the fire department came. And what came out was a horrendous chil Hashem. People were walking around as if it's, a regular simcha, which it was, a convention, whatever it was. And the firemen came in with their shmoyne begodim and with emergencies. And it was just something that was a very bad reflection on the people that were there. Why weren't they more careful? So you have to realize that a person should altia tzaddik harbe. If they say not to light in the hotel room, don't light in the hotel room. Light in some place where there's hana that can be enjoyed during the Suda. And now we come to the last part. I guess we could legitimately say achrein hichbid, achrein chaviv, and that is the technological question that one has in a hotel or any of these type of situations. So I'm going to start off with something that I heard, which I want to mention because it brings us to the truth of the situation. I heard quoting both Rabbi Yashiv and Rabbi Nissim Karel Zechayim Levracha that you're allowed to stay in a hotel that has climate control. For those that are not familiar, there are more modern hotels that basically the electricity, the lights, the heating, the air conditioning are programmed to go on when there's movement in the room. In other words, it's basically to save money. If no one's there, you don't need electricity, you don't need heat, you don't need lights or heating. So someone quoted Rabbi Yashiv, the Shailos, that you're allowed to use that hotel room even though when you come in, either the lights will go on, or the AC, or the heating, which to me was unacceptable. There has to be a misquote, especially Rabbi Yashiv is quoted as having a problem with the surveillance cameras by the Kaisel. How could that the same Rabbi Yashiv said that a climate control room is of no issue? So I began my fascinating journey into this sugya of technology and Shabbos regarding hotels. Let's start from the beginning, and that'll put us back over 120 years ago. The Beis Yitzchak, the Levav HaRav, in his Chuvas, writes, I heard in Vienna and Wien that they started having automatic lights. Now, the way he describes it, you open the door and the light goes on, which of course was an old invention that the light went on, but when the door was open. So he says very emphatically that opening the door is tantamount to malacha deraisa of putting on the light. In those days, is an incandescent bulb, which was a real malacha deraisa of havara. And closing the door is the malacha of mavir. And he says, don't think that's a grama, that's a ma'isa biyadayim, because you open the door, the light goes on. You close the door, the light goes off. This is what he says. Now, you have to understand, a grama is when you do something that's muta that results in action of malacha. For example, a fire is burning down a path and it might catch on to something of your possessions. So the Mishnah says, if you take a barrel of water and put it in the path of the fire, so when the fire gets to the barrel of water, the barrel will burst, the water will gush out and put out the fire. That's a grama. That's a qualified grama, because you did nothing more than putting a barrel of water on the ground. That's not a ma'aseh malacha. But in this case, reasons the Beis Yitzchak, when you open the door, that's the switch to put on the light. So that's the malacha of avara. Now, when you close the door, whatever signals the door to the light to go off, then you're closing the light. Now, this has to be clarified, because what I just heard Rabbi Gadisman mentioned, Rav Moshe's tshuva was discussing a refrigerator that has a bulb in it, and when you open the door, the light bulb goes on. And typically we disconnect the light bulb before Shabbos, but the person forgot to do that before Shabbos. Someone asked Rav Moshe, what should I do? I have all my Shabbos needs, my food in the refrigerator. If I open the door, the light will go on. So Rav Moshe suggests he enlists the guy to open the door. The light will go on, but that's a minor problem, because the issa is amir la'akim to instruct the non-Jew to do malacha. Here, you instructed the non-Jew to open the door. There's no malacha in opening the door. The light goes on inevitably. It's a psik reisha. So Moshe mentions a Ramah in the end of Reish Nun Gimel that Amir La'akum is only us to tell him to do malacha directly. If it's a psik reisha by a guy, that's of no concern. And again, how does he apply that? If you tell a guy put on the light, that's awesome. If you tell the non-Jew open the door, that's a benign act. Opening the door of a refrigerator, there's nothing wrong with that. The light went on inevitably. That's a psik reisha by a akum, that's mutter. So Rav Moshe assumed if you tell a guy to open a door of a refrigerator to put the light on, that's called a psik reisha. But the truth is, we could understand it differently. If that is its switch, in fact, there is no manual switch to this light bulb in the refrigerator. So opening the door is tantamount to putting on the light. That's its switch. And Rav Shlomo Zalman, in no less than 3 places, twice in Shmir Shabbos and once in Mincha Shleima, he takes exception with Rav Moshe. And he says, I don't think that instructing a non-Jew to open the door of a refrigerator, which puts on the light, I don't think that's only a psik reisha. That's a ma'aseh b'yadayim. That's a direct action, because that is its switch. And being that's its switch, that would be a malacha gemura, not just a psik reisha. So you realize there's a grama, the lowest level. Psik reisha is in between. And Rav Shlomo Zalman is saying, opening a refrigerator door that puts on the light is not a grama. It's not even a psik reisha. It's worse than that. It's an actual malacha gemura. But the understanding is crucial for the next few questions. And that is, if something is done, if this is the way to do the malacha, you can't dismiss it as grama or psik reisha. This is the malacha. The Rosh in Bava Kama wonders, some malachas seem to be grama. For example, zoira, when you winnow something, you throw the tfuah in the air, and the food stuff falls down, and the shaft flies away with the wind. Why isn't that grama? Says the Rosh, if that's the tzuras hamalach, if that's the way the malach is done, it's not just a grama, it's a ma'aseh b'yadayim. And that is certainly the understanding of the Beis Yisli we mentioned earlier. Because when you open a closet door and the light goes on, it's not that, hey, I opened the door innocently and the light went on. That's the switch. There's no other switch. And that's why he said that opening a closet door, for example, and the light goes on, is not just a grum, it's a ma'aseh b'yadayim. And that's why, to me, it was unthinkable that a hotel room with climate control is okay, because I just opened the door. You innocently open the door, but programming that door opening is the climate control with all its manifestations, with the lights, with the AC, with the heating. And especially to say Rabbi Yashiv said that as being mutter, if Rabbi Yashiv was quoted as having a problem with the surveillance cameras by the Kaisel. But we could find somewhat of a happy medium here. Because the emes is, imagine, for example, you have a tourist, someone from Eretz Yisrael comes to America, a real Yerushalmi Yid, and is walking in the street, and a random person off the street, a non-Jew, wants to take a picture of him. You never saw such a person. It's interesting, So does the Yid have to run for his life? He's doing a malacha. He's not doing anything. He's being passive. The guy is doing malacha with him. The truth is, today, when we walk in the streets, little do we know that we are being recorded. There are satellites that are recording everything that takes place in this world. Does that mean we can't walk in the streets because we are being filmed, we are being recorded? The answer is that we're not doing anything. This is happening from an outside source. I didn't instruct it. I didn't pay for it. I didn't ask for it. I am the object of a non-Jew doing malacha for his own benefit. That has very little meaning as far as I'm concerned halachically. Now, the Kerala David says if you pose for a picture, for example, you need a passport picture made on Shabbos, so that might be a messiah. You're helping out because you're posing, you're ordering it. But if a guy takes a picture or a satellite recording, that has no bearing on my Shmir Shabbos. Rabbi Yashiv is quoted as saying the following, and this is, I saw in the HaRav and Psachim Chafei Medbeis, The Gemara says in Psachim Chafei Mebeis Hanoah Haba Adam Bal Karchai. Hanoah that comes to a person Bal Karchai and he doesn't want the Hanoah is not problematic mitzad halacha. For example, a person is walking in the street and there's a smell of avodah zarah, incense, which is asav hana, but he doesn't enjoy it. In fact, it's very unappealing to him. But what should he do? He has to walk in the street. Hanoah haba bal karchai is not a problem in halacha. So Rabbi Yashiv is quoted as saying that's why typically when a person is walking and there's a camera filming all of the people entering the building, he has no interest, he has no purpose in that taking place. And that's why Rabbi Yashiv felt when you're going to a building that there is a constant monitoring of all entrance and exits. It's a constant surveillance camera that's of no concern to you. You'll ask, but I thought he's the one that had a problem with the kaisel, the security in the kaisel that had these these surveillance cameras. So then I saw a beautiful discussion in the Or Shabbos, but his problem there was because Yidden and all Yidden, because of security and safety, they do want this security feature to be working on Shabbos. We want to have the heightened security that we need, and we want to see what's going on. And there's a screen that's being monitored by the police. So we can't dismiss it and say, I don't care, I don't want it. You do want it. Every Yid wants to have safety at the kaisel. As opposed to me walking into a shul that they put it on, the shul, whoever put it on for their reasons, but I have no interest, that doesn't bother us. And Rav Nissen Karel, it's in the Sefer, in Chelik Daled of the Chutshani and Hilchos Shabbos, also allows a surveillance camera that's going for a person to walk in its range, because basically it's going anyhow. My presence just changes, and instead of taking the pavement that it's focused on, now I'm on the pavement, it's recording me, but it's not doing any extra malacha because of me. In other words, if it's a surveillance camera that's also motion detector, which means it's not taking regularly, just if it senses motion movement, it will activate and start recording the person. That's a regular motion detector. That's a problem. But they were talking about somebody's going 24/7. That's basically no difference. What it's recording, that would not be a problem. So again, a regular surveillance camera that's going 24/7 doesn't present a serious issue as far as Hilchos Shabbos. I once heard a fascinating Shailos, halacha l'maisa. A person made a bar mitzvah in a hotel. After Shabbos, someone told him, I have a great offer for you. We have security cameras 24/7 in the hotels. We could give you, if the price is right, of course, if you pay us, we could give you a video of your entire Shabbos bar mitzvah. Because don't forget, they record everything that's going on for their purposes, for security, but they have it. So they could just convert it onto a video and you could have your Shabbos bar mitzvah from beginning to the end. So again, I don't think that's very, exciting to watch a Shabbos bar mitzvah, but in halach, it's hard to say that's awesome. Now, I did see, and this goes back probably at least 50 years ago, both the Ber Moshe and the Oz Nidbru discuss what the Oz Nidbru calls it the Chassid Shaita, where someone wanted to record his Rebbe, his Rav, whether it was the Kol Nidre, Yom Kippur night, or Shalosh Shudas Torah. There are different stories, but basically, they wanted to record the Rebbe's Shalosh Shudas Torah or Kol Nidre, and they set up a tape recorder. Now, I don't want to date anybody, but tape recorder was they had in those days that went with a timer, and it went on, and the person that davened Kol Nidre, or the person that said the Shalosh Shudas Torah, was being recorded by a machine that was going automatically. So it was a shaila that the person that was talking was doing malacha. He didn't know it, of course, but the assumption was by talking, by giving a Shalosh Shudas Torah, or by saying Kol Nidre, you are causing more electric current to be generated because it's recording something instead of recording nothing. So they discuss if this tape is mutter b'hana or not, because the malacha was done on Shabbos. I once mentioned this in a share, and someone says, I have a copy of the tape, I can give it to you if you want to hear it. So I guess people pass it on their own that that's mutter. But the point is that would be a rare case that you could have that because the recording of bar mitzvah was done beheta, done by the non-Jewish owners of the hotel for security purposes. But bringing this more lamaisa in our motion detectors that we have today, which means you walk into a room, the light goes on. You walk by someone's driveway, the light goes on. That's a motion detector of lights, or the climate controls. They are all fundamentally different than a surveillance camera, because they are only activated because of your motion, because of your movement. Whether you complete or break the current is irrelevant, but it's your movement that's activating this device. So the person himself, by walking, is putting it on. Unlike the surveillance camera that's going 24/7 and nothing is happening because of my motion, here it's my motion that's activating it. And I would even say more so, because there is no manual switch to these devices. This is the way that it's done. And that's why most poskim feel that a motion detector is a problem. If the Yid is aware of that, what's going on, and he should not walk by someone's home, then when he walks by, in that range, the light goes on, because he's really putting it on. Now, Rav Vozna Zechaynu Levracha, one of the great poskim of our Dor in Chelik Tessim and Samach Tes of Shevet HaLevi, he was noite lahakol for a very interesting reason. And he says the starting point of Shabbos is meleches machsheves. Now, when we learn halacha, we focus on the word machsheves. Is it a chashuv malacha? Did you intend to do it? Is it a psikresha? Is it a grama? But the aleph has to be malacha. And he says when a person is walking home from a shul Friday night and he walks by someone's motion detector, there's no malacha. So of what importance could machsheves be if there's no malacha? And he seems to feel a motion detector in its whole operation is lacking the fundamental criterion of malacha. That's not a malacha. Now he does add in Chelik Tes, Samach Tes, and earlier in Siman Samach Ches, which is written 3 years later, in fact, even though it's printed first in the Tuvas, but he says, I don't mean to be matir an automatic light where a person puts it on by opening the door, because that's his intention. That's the way it's done. But here a person is walking to shul and he passes someone's motion detector. It has no importance to him. He finds it hard to believe that would qualify to be a malacha. If it's not a malacha, it doesn't enter the question of maleches machsheves. Now, Lamaisa, in that shub, he does say, I'm very hesitant, I'm very concerned. Ve'ein b'daiti l'chapesh heterim b'zeh, because ein safek b'libi, if we allow this today, we don't know what's going to be tomorrow. And the truth is today, talking about today in Tammuz, Tafshin Pei Aleph, who knows what's going to be in El Tafshin Pei Aleph. There are constantly new innovations, new creations, new devices that a person could basically do nothing and activate real malacha. So Rav Vozna's chiddush is it's not a malacha. But as I told you, many poskim do not agree, and I understand why, and I'll explain why. Because the truth is, this is the derech hamalacha. Especially a person has an hotel room that is climate control, so this is the way he puts on the light or the AC or the heating. So it's not that it just happens to be. So even Rav Vozna that was Mekel, if you're walking by the range of a motion detector, it has no importance to you, it has no relevance to you, you don't want it, that you could say is not malacha. But something like a climate-controlled room, which you want the AC, you want the heating, you want the lighting, it's hard to believe that would be mutter according to any shita. Rabbi Yashiv certainly did not say such a thing. Whoever told me Rabbi Yashiv from this relative were Mekel, they probably confused a climate-controlled room with a surveillance camera, which both of them were Mekel. But to me, which I'd like to mention, Rabbi Vozna says Yisoid, Adam Hoylach Kedarkai, we don't find a precedent. That's a Ma'aseh Issa. You're walking naturally, no intention to malacha. We don't find an halacha that has the chshivas of a malacha. Now, by Zechisi Lahavin, I can't say more because Vozna was the Abir HaPoiskim. By Zechisi Lahavin, we find in Shulchan Aruch Shin Lamed Vav Siv Gimel, and Mr. Bura points this out specifically. A person that's walking barefoot in high grass, And it's inevitable that when he walks in high grass barefoot, he will tear out grass as he walks. It's also to walk there because the walking is a form of psikresha. He will definitely, inevitably tear out grass. Now there also you could say, Adam Halilach Kedarka, he's going to shul. He's not interested in tearing out grass. He has no purpose in the torn out grass. But evidently, if something happens, you can't be oblivious to those facts. The Mishnah Berurah and Shin Tezayin Sivkat Memches discusses a person that's walking in an area that's swarming with ants. There are some places in Europe, they have this Shailos that the ground is full of ants. There's no place to walk, that you don't step on ants or bugs, whatever it may be. And the Mishnah Berurah says it's awesome. If it's a psikresh, it's awesome. So that's why it's really hard to understand that we could say a person is walking innocently with no intention of malacha, but we have to know that when a person is walking and he knows it's going to happen, he should avoid it. Avad and avadi, he should avoid it. I think that a person that realized it the first time, so he learned his lesson the second time, he stays away from that area. Now, what someone once asked me, he walked into the range of most detect, he put on the light. Does he have to stay there till after Shabbos, which is not very comfortable? So I told him you're making a mistake in the Metzias. Staying there is probably making it worse because then the light's staying on the whole Shabbos because of you. The truth is, this is a program that goes off after X amount of seconds, whatever the time that the person programs. It goes off when it no longer feels the presence of a person. So by staying there, you're really making the light stay on. By walking out, you're not closing it, but you're taking away the reason for it not to go off. And as it goes off, when it then senses no motion, by you staying there, you're keeping it on. But walking off is not closing it. It's just being mesa meineya that's keeping it on. And indeed, you're allowed to walk away. I hope this was somewhat of a contribution to this wonderful sugya. I'm sure there's more to speak about, but let's hope we should make simchas. Thank you all for listening.